Our reading this morning is from the Hopi Nation, the elders of the Hopi Nation, I think, because I looked up the origins and it's credited to several different groups, but I'm going to assume it comes from the elders of the Hopi Nation. And it goes like this. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are being torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. See who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we have been waiting for. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of AI, artificial intelligence. I have used or tried to use AI programs twice now in preparation of sermons. Yes, really. Out of curiosity and simply for the fun of it. Last December, I asked it to suggest a sermon on calmness that would not put a congregation to sleep. At least it was short. But it did put me to sleep. Most recently, I asked how I would preach an election sermon that was fair, balanced, and prophetic. I deep-sixed this sermon as well. Better natural intelligence or ignorance than artificial and pitiful piety. Then it came to me in a blinding and non-technological flash. A substantial number of American citizens want to be able to vote not with human intelligence, but with artificial intelligence generated by robotic politicians, whom I will not name, but you will get the drift, perhaps. Furthermore, it occurred to me that so many voters will be attracted to cult figures, will surrender their natural intelligence to their idols, cult figures, while most of us will try to make nuanced appraisals of our preferred candidates. Well, this little mind exercise pointed out to me what I've learned about the American electoral system. Elections these days seem to be more about emotions than reason, than logic. This is a blow, I think, to those of us for whom logic and reason are of central importance. Let me illustrate. Gary Trudeau, creator of the Doonesbury Strip. I assume some of you have read the Doonesbury Strip. It was taken out of my newspaper now that the election season was on, which is too bad, but would have been great fun. But Doonesbury is a kind of prophet, I think. Not only does he give us a chance to laugh at our often upside down world, he also turns humor into a searing analysis of what is really going on in that world. One episode stands out as a chilling reminder of the challenge of being Unitarian Universalists who respect diversity and reject dogmatism in politics as well as religion. Doonesbury's character, Mark Slackmeyer, campus revolutionary turned radio commentator, is in the studio watching TV. Fox News. We report, you decide. Mark says, that has to be the most cynical slogan in the history of journalism. Chase Talbot III, formerly Mark's significant other, a conservative Republican and co-host of their NPR show, All Things Being Equal. He retorts, drives you crazy, doesn't it? You know why? Because you liberals are hung up on fairness. You actually try to respect all points of view. But conservatives feel no need whatsoever to consider other views. We know we're right, so why bother? Because we have no tradition of tolerance, we're unencumbered by doubt. So we roll you guys every time. Mark hesitates, then says, actually, you make a good point. To which Chase responds, see, only a loser would admit that. Now, to be sure, that is a caricature. I know some conservatives, many conservatives who are very open-minded, and I do know a few liberals who are very close-minded. However, if we examine today's landscape, religious and or political, I think we will detect a kernel of truth in Trudeau's sweeping critique. As that prophetess of the human spirit, Jane Fonda, put it, the predominant paradigm is a fundamentalism that has no room for complexity, ambiguity, or mystery. To be sure, these are tempestuous times. If it bleeds, it leads, goes the old slogan about the press, printed and visual. And it's never been more true. I don't know if you watch the local news or any newscasts, as I do, painfully sometimes. We are being, in the words of one astute observer, being bludgeoned into fatalism. When I watch our local news, I immediately think there's a murder about to be committed on my doorstep, or at least around the block. Despite the fact that in Rochester, the homicide rate has been falling for the last several years. Crime, with a few exceptions around the country, there are exceptions, has been decreasing. I read polls about the dismal state of the American economy, despite the fact that that economy is humming along now with very low unemployment, record low unemployment, higher wages, and inflation, though a bit higher than the Fed likes it, is going down slowly. Apparently, so studies say, people are feeling pretty good about their own economy, but they think the bigger economy is in the tank, a depression. And if they hear that we are in an awful state enough times, they will come to believe it. Deep discernment, reasonable reflection, hefty homework are not really in our voting public's DNA this year. Every day seems to be the anniversary of something awful. And so I conclude that politics is so much about feeling. That is not to say that all things are bright and beautiful in our world. On the international level, we have the wars in Ukraine and Gaza as only the most dramatic ones. In the US, poverty exists in the midst of plenty. Racism endures. Homo and transphobia are given legal status in some red states. Climate change deniers still abound even as the earth warms to the breaking point. The status quo then leaves plenty to be desired. Yet I worry about the disturbed, how shall we call them, liberals, progressives among us. Social critic Chris Hedges, who studied with the great prophetic figure in our movement, James Luther Adams, points to the paralysis of doing nothing. and says the present predicament has turned the consent of the governed into a cruel joke. And I confess that with arthritis and aging, combined with a here we go again, been there, done that kind of mentality, I find I've taken a little bit of the edge off my prophetic zeal and social action. But one thing I have learned from my study of Susan B. Anthony is that social justice is not something that you can say, here and now we have social justice. It is more a process than a single event or historical point. It is an ongoing process that lasts a lifetime, and even as Susan B. Anthony found out, beyond it, because she died 14 years before women were given the right to vote in this country. There are times when I am discouraged to the breaking point and thinking that maybe it's time to stop this activism that has characterized a good deal of my life and just stop and smell the roses. Well, I still like to smell the roses, but they are only a stopping point, I hope, on the way to greater involvement in the world in which I live. Liberal religion, Unitarian Universalism, has always had more a conversational than a declamatory tone, more interested in seeking truth known or to be known than declaring we have already found it. We have learned to live with and even embrace ambiguity with enthusiasm. And we have gathered together in religious community to share both our ignorance and our wisdom in a community of seekers and doers. For example, in 1969-70, I participated in the clergy consultation service on problem pregnancies in Ithaca and then later in Rochester. Before New York State's abortion reform law, and well before Roe v. Wade, I counseled women who needed and wanted abortions, but could not legally obtain them in New York State. In actions skirting civil disobedience, I joined with other clergy in both counseling and advocacy, trying to change New York's law to decriminalize abortion in New York State. Finally, in 1970, with the help of, and please hang on to your seats, a Republican Assemblywoman, Connie Cook from Ithaca, a Republican Governor, Nelson Rockefeller, and a Republican Senate, New York State decriminalized abortion with a dramatic last-time vote of the Democrat George Michaels of Auburn, who changed his vote at the very last minute to push this legislation through. These were profiles in political courage. That memory is vivid since recently I was invited to go to Ithaca to share that experience with the clergy consultation service at a meeting at Ithaca's First Unitarian Church. In 1970, when we closed our counseling service, passed New York State's abortion reform, and then celebrated Roe v. Wade decision, I took a victory lap. Many of us took victory laps, but much, much too soon. There is a lesson here for both pulpit and pew, as abortion will be a big issue again in 2024. Who knew? Who could know? The mostly women who peopled that sanctuary in Ithaca just a few weeks ago. However, abortion is only one sub-issue in a larger issue of democracy, of people being able to choose the path of their lives. There appears to be a large and very red wave of conservatism around the world, reactionism, and the US, as we know, is no exception. Even as we push for economic equity, advocate human rights for asylum seekers, seek just treatment for the LGBTQ+ community, even as we rally for a green economy in response to global climate change, even as we seek to be religiously relevant in an autocratic time, there is pushback from conservative forces, and that pushback is massive. Remember that dialogue between Mark, the progressive, and Chase, the conservative? In that Doonesbury vignette, we have an insight into the problem we face. Poor Mark is being steamrolled by Chase because Mark sees both sides of the issue and has to think about things a bit. He respects the views of others. He admits that his opponent has a point. Chase knows he is right, no doubt in his mind. Chase, because we have no tradition of tolerance, we're unencumbered by doubt, so we roll you guys every time. Mark hesitates, then says, actually, you make a good point. To which Chase responds, as you will remember, see, only a loser would admit that. And that last statement does remind me of a certain politician who shall remain nameless. The moral of this story is not to become a moss-back conservative. It is not to become like Mark, a well-meaning but ineffectual liberal. It is not to give up any struggle, political or religious, because it is just too doggone hard to have a nuanced view of the world. The moral of the story, I think, is this. We have to be compassionate with those with whom we disagree, and disagree sharply. But we need to express our convictions with equal vigor. Even while we Unitarian Universalists honor the worth and dignity of every person, even Chase, even the right-wing politicians and activists, reactionaries, we still respect their views and try as hard as we can to understand them. At least I'm speaking from my personal point of view. You may have others. You no doubt do. Even as we are bombarded day in and day out with news that bleeds red, even as we hear from self-righteous declarations, we must not be seduced by the utter confidence of those who have simplistic solution to complex problems. There is a song, which I will not sing. You'll be thankful for that. But in the musical, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, it was written evidently by a Unitarian Universalist. Maybe you will see why. It might well be a caricature of our movement. Here it goes. You're a good man, Charlie Brown. You have humility, nobility, and a sense of humor that is very rare indeed. You are kind to all the animals and every little bird. With a heart of gold, you believe what you are told, every single solitary word. You bravely face adversity. You're cheerful through the day. You're thoughtful, brave, and courteous. You're a good man, Charlie Brown. You're a prince, and a prince could be a king. With a heart such as yours, you could open any door. If only you weren't so wishy-washy. Who, us? Wishy-washy? We are the church of perpetual curiosity, competing with the church of eternal certitude. We are the battered religious liberals and have the unenviable task of being both compassionate and effective. Compassionate toward those, even friends and families, who see the world differently than we do, the people who see the world in black and white instead of the grayness that we perceive in the world. And even as we deal with nuance, we also need to act firmly and decisively on what we believe, even though we're not 100% sure, maybe 75, maybe 80, maybe 90% sure. But that little bit of doubt cannot stop us from acting firmly. Even though People on the other side, perhaps, have what Mark Twain called the calm confidence of a Christian with 4 aces. For example, despite a Georgia court ruling that embryos are children, I will ascend the ramparts to defend a woman's right to choose. At the same time, I will try to understand the feelings of that person, those persons who do not agree with me. I think of a very vocal encounter I had during one pro-choice demonstration. I was on one side of the street demonstrating with the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. On the other side of the street were Christians for Life. And Mary, very blonde and very vocal, when she learned that I was a minister, said, "Preacher, you're going to hell." Well, as a Universalist, I don't believe in hell, so it had no particular impact. And so I simply smiled silently. But later on, I began to learn why some who differed from my views did so. Those of us in the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice met with 5 people from Christians for Life in a Quaker-style Claremont circle, very disciplined circle. And we went around explaining where we come from, what did we believe, how did we get involved in this particular issue, and how did we come to our particular beliefs. Well, no minds were changed, but hearts were open. We could at least begin to see the humanity of those persons who across the street were condemning us to hell. As the poet Rumi wrote, "Somewhere beyond all the areas of rightness and wrongness, there is a common ground. I'll meet you there, if only." In 2016, I heard a well-known screed against immigrants, to which I respond with my own screed. These immigrants who crossed our border, they're coming from everywhere. They are often the best. They are people with lots of talents. They are doctors and nurses. They are lawyers and judges, teachers and technicians. They harvest our food. They have the lowest crime rate of any ethnic group. They are dreamers and parents of dreamers. They are men and women and children who seek nothing but to better their lives. They are bringing energy and youth to a nation that needs it. We are lucky to have them. They enrich our blood and they transform our communities. And some, no doubt, are bad people, but we have plenty of them here already. They're called racists and homophobes, and some are cult leaders. Well, even while I will advocate for a green economy, how must it feel to be threatened by middle-class environmental activists? I try to empathize with the miner in West Virginia as coal goes into the dustbin of human history and jobs disappear. I lived in West Virginia for a summer. I have driven through the mountains and valleys of that state and seen these mountains scraped clean of their vegetation for coal mining. And then in the valleys, poor huts of people who are barely able to scrabble a living from what they are doing. I try not to forget them, even as I work for environmental justice. And I drive an electric car, and I'm a vegetarian, but I try not to be judgmental. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Dickens was so right. In these times, I worry about the drooping morale of so many progressives like me, who would change the world, who would reform our challenged institutions, who seek justice. I see hints of hopelessness and helplessness among us, even in me. Hope may be, as Emily Dickinson put it, the thing with feathers, that which can fly. Or hope may be the liberal spirit in action. Hope is like a muscle. It develops as it is being used. Hope is a muscle, a spiritual muscle. If not used, it becomes flabby. Our Unitarian forefather, Theodore Parker, in the mid-19th century, with slavery on the rise and the Civil War imminent, said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I'm sure that it bends toward justice." Martin Luther King Jr. amplified these words. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Well, Parker lived in a very difficult time, but it was also the age of reform at the very same time. King lived in the midst of racism and led the civil rights movement. Did Parker or King mean that the moral arc bends toward justice automatically, inevitably? I don't think so. It bends toward justice only if we put our backs and our minds, our hearts and souls into bending that arc. It's a very stiff material with which we work. Bending the arc. So election 2024 has spiritual and ethical as well as social and political dimensions. But our mission, I think, is to renew our spirit so that we can help bend that arc. Our faith draws upon its history to demonstrate the spirit in which we work. Unitarianism was first given institutional expression in the 16th century. Transylvania, of all places. King John Sigismund, a Calvinist, King John Sigismund and his court preacher, Francis David. David had been a Catholic priest, he'd been a Calvinist and a Lutheran, and only finally a Unitarian. But these two men produced the Edict of Torda in 1568. Which proclaimed religious freedom in all that land. And tradition has it that during debate on that declaration, the Trinitarian conservative Elias said to David, the heretical Unitarian, "If I win this debate, you will be executed." After a brief pause, David, the Unitarian, replied, "And if I win this debate, you and everyone else in this land will be given complete religious freedom and the tolerance due to every child of man." I urge us to take that kind of spirit into election 2024. Our mission in this critical election is not to be simply optimistic. That is an expression of human indifference, to me at least. Our mission is to be hopeful, because hope is a muscle that cries to be used. If not, it withers. So I say to you, keep making good trouble. Keep hope alive. Keep bending that arc. We are the ones we have been waiting for. Amen.